Hi everyone, welcome to another video on LSED. In today's tutorial, we'll revisit the Vlookup function. We've covered the Vlookup in a previous video, and I'll leave a link to that. The intent of this video is to cover some additional features of Vlookup that can be useful in our day-to-day work. To begin with, we'll start off with the simplest version, which most of us are well acquainted with, which is when we are using Vlookup for an exact match. So let's look at that with an example and just refresh our memories on the Vlookup structure and the format of the parameters that we have. So to begin with, we have a data set, and on this data set, what we have is a list of columns. And what we'll try and do is, using the Vlookup function, try and retrieve the information from a different column. So for instance, in column J right now, what you have is a list of cities. And what we'll try and do is, for each city, which is there in column C on this table, we'll try and get the corresponding state. So for example, if the city is Fresno, the value that we should obtain is California. If on the other hand, the city is Boulder, the state we'll try and get is Colorado. Okay. So let's say that we want to obtain the values of the corresponding state using Vlookup and put them in column K. So begin with the Vlookup function when we try and type it in, and Excel, as you know, does provide us with a list of parameters. So the first parameter is the lookup value. That one's pretty simple. So let's just select the lookup value. So we want to look up the value of Boulder. And then where do we want to look up that value? So the value that we want to look up is specifically in this range, city and state. You could select a longer range as well. However, it's not required because the value that we want to extract or retrieve is in column 2. So we could just limit our selection to the second column. And for the purpose of the exercise, let's make sure we have selected the correct range, starting from the top left of column C all the way till the bottom right of column D. Once we have done and selected the range, what we are essentially telling Excel is that this is a range in which I want to look up for the value in J2, which is the lookup value. The next thing is the column index number, which is starting with the first column. Where is the value that we want to look up located? So for instance, if you're looking up a value in column C and you want to return the value in column C, your column index number should be 1 because you're looking up the value in the same column. However, if you're looking up in the next column, as is true in this case, you're looking up a value in column C and trying to return a value in column D, the value will be the number 2 because it's the second column right after that. And then we want to get a exact match. As you can see, for exact match, you can use the Boolean value of false, or simply put, you can just use the value of 0, which stands for the Boolean value of false, which is to tell Excel that I'm using Vlookup with the option for an exact match. In other words, if you don't find that exact match, don't return me anything, in which case it will return a value similar to not applicable or NA. And then if you just complete the formula and hit enter, there you have, for the city of Boulder, the corresponding value of state is Colorado, and that's what you have here. Now, in order to apply the formula to all the cells, you know that we can drag the formula. However, before we drag the formula, please bear in mind that when you drag the formula, all cells and respective cell indices will also be dragged along with it. So we'll have to freeze the range, and you can freeze the range by using F4 to freeze the range. Alternatively, what you can also do is you could have also selected just column C and column D in completion, which would have then applied to the entire range of values in column C and column D, and then also you could have dragged the formula. Okay, and we could possibly take a look at that example as well. So anyways, here what we have is we have the right value, and now we have frozen the range, and now all that we have to do is we can just drag the formula along, and you can see that you're getting the exact match. For each and every city, you're getting the corresponding state right now in column K. which is exactly what we wanted. Now, we also alluded to the range shortly. So let's take a look at that as well. So let's say we apply VLOOKUP again. So when we apply the VLOOKUP function, the lookup value is, let's say, in column J. And then when we want to look up the range, remember that what we had done was we had manually selected the range. But what we can also do is we can select the entirety of the columns. Since we are interested only in the data within columns C and D, the alternative to that is to use the starting column colon the ending column of the data range. And as you will see here with C colon D, what it is doing is it's not just selecting the data within the table. As you can see, if you see the markers or the red colored lines which tell you the range of data that has been selected, that they extend right till the bottom of the sheet, right? So it's not strictly speaking required. You could select a more custom and smaller range if you want, but if you don't want it, for the ease and simplicity, you could also go in for something like this. And again, you want to return the value in the second column, which is state, and you want an exact match, which is the Boolean value of false, or you could use the numeric value of 0. And if you were to use it, you would still get the same value as you have already obtained. And then accordingly, you could just go ahead and drag the formula, and you'll see you get the correct answer for all the cells. So this is something which is very basic. I'm assuming all of you have covered this. All of you already know this from your past experience, but still good to revisit and recap this. And now, to extend this problem a bit further so that we can understand another important feature. So very often when solving business problems, what you will encounter is that when you're running a VLOOKUP function because you want to extract corresponding values from a data table, your requirement might not be limited to one single column to be extracted. So for instance, here we just wanted values to be returned for the column state, right? However, your business problem might not be as simple as that. So let's take an example. So let's say that out here, what we have is a list of, let's say, the sale numbers. So the sale number values that you see here are unique identifiers of each and every sale of agricultural equipment in the following cities and states. Having said that, let's say for the given list of sale numbers, our requirement, so let's say this is the sale number column right here, and let's say we want to obtain for each of these sale numbers, let's say we want to get multiple columns. So let's say the columns that we want is, let's say we want the city, the state, and let's say the city, the state, and the equipment. City, the state, and the equipment. Okay. So how would we do this? So obviously, in order to do this, what we'll do is we know the VLOOKUP function or formula, and we will apply that repetitively across different cells. How would that function? So the way that it would function is, so first of all, we'll apply the VLOOKUP so that we can get back the city. Then we'll apply the VLOOKUP so that we can get the state, and then we'll apply the VLOOKUP so that we can get the equipment, right? So how does this work? So we'll just do the lookup on this. The lookup value is there in cell number I2. And what do we want to return? We want to return the city. So we can just select the appropriate range here. And remember, we want an exact match. So we have an exact match. And we can simply then freeze the range just to make sure that when we do apply the drag on this, we don't drag the range along with us, right? And there you have the corresponding cities for each and every sale number here, right? Same thing would apply for state. So let's say I want to extract the state. So the lookup value, so we select the lookup value, then we select the range from which we want to extract the lookup value, and we want the state. So we select till column 4. We drag it down so that we have the right range selected. And which column is this? So this is column number 4. If you start counting from sale number, this is column 4. And you want an exact match or the Boolean value of 0. and there you have the appropriate state as well. And then all that you'd have to do is freeze the range across this, drag it down all the way till the bottom, and you'll see that you have obtained the state value as well, right? Following which, of course, equipment, let's just run it for equipment as well. So we have the lookup value again, select the appropriate range, and remember this is column 6, right? So one important tip here, which is very important if you're dealing with large data sets and lots of rows. Say if you're dealing with 50,000 rows of data or 100,000 rows of data, and then on top of it, the additional complication that you have is, let's say you are dealing with 300 columns. Now when you start dragging it, many times you might have experience, but if you've not, just take my word for it. When you start dragging it, you might drag it, select the correct range, and then suddenly remember that you never kept a count of the number of the column from which you have to extract the data, right? So the important thing to bear in mind when you're actually dragging it on the first row. So let's say if you were to drag this again, and we start dragging it. When you start dragging it, you'll see on the screen it shows you that it's the first row and the third column, first row and the fourth column. Just be mindful of keeping in mind which column you stop on. So if you've stopped on column on sale revenue, remember it says 7C, right? And again, you might select all the range till sale revenue, but if you only want to return the value from the column for month, for example, if you just go back, you'll see the column is, so the value is 1R5C, right? Which means it's the fifth column that you have here. You scroll to the right, go on to the sale revenue. That's what you have. Okay, so important thing to bear in mind, and then select the range. And again, what did we want? We wanted equipment, right? Equipment was in which column? Equipment was in the 6th column. And then the option for exact match, 0, and there we are, we have the equipment. And now we can just go ahead and freeze the range. Once you've frozen the range, you drag it, you have the correct answers for the equipment as well on this one. Okay, so far so good. So this is something that all of you can anyways do. However, and this was simple, but imagine if you're trying to return, let's say 10 columns. You would have to do this entire step again and again 10 times, which makes it highly inefficient. Thankfully, as you know, Excel does have options for array formulas, and that gives us a much more speedier, efficient way to extract multiple columns of data using Vlookup and populate the required values. So how would that work? So let's say we are trying to do the same thing but in a far more simpler way, and that would be we want to apply a single Vlookup such that we can extract the city, the state, and the equipment, right? Same requirement as before, slightly different formulation. So here we have the lookup value, and now let's select the range. So the range will be selected, let's say, till equipment, because we don't need anything beyond the equipment. So we'll limit ourselves to selecting it till the equipment column. Okay, so that's our range, right, till the bottom of the data table. And now, instead of mentioning the column index, what we'll instead specify is an array of column indices. What's an array? An array is simply a list of objects. In this case, the array will be a list of column indices. You could specify it with the curly braces, and within the curly braces, so instead of giving it one single column index, we'll give it a list or a set of column indices. Okay, so the column indices that we are in requirement of is city. City is the third column index, State is the fourth column index. Remember, we are going to be counting from sale number, which is the starting edge of your data table. And we want, let's say, equipment. Equipment is the 6th column index. And then close the array or the list with another curly brace. And then we are going in for an exact match. So we'll use a boolean of false or a numeric value of 0. They're going to be equivalent. And then what we'll also do is freeze the range. Just make sure that if we do happen to drag it and apply it across drag it and apply it across multiple cells, multiple rows, then we should get the correct value. And there we are. And as you can see now, that with one single function here, what has in effect occurred is that we have been able to populate values from multiple columns, or return values from multiple columns. So if you see for sale number 816, I'm just going to highlight this row here so that it makes for easier comparison for us. So if you see, if we just applied a VLOOKUP with an option for multiple column return on sale number 816. The city is Tucson, the state is Arizona, the equipment is road retailer, and that's what you have here with a single function. Also, just take a look. If we were to just click on the cell for Tucson, do you see that it highlights not just the cell J2, which is for Tucson, but J2, K2, and L2. You know, it's almost as if all these three cells are working in tandem, working together. And as a result, it shows you that single selection for these three cells, which is what we had essentially returned on this. All right. And then accordingly, as you can see, if we were to drag this, it will automatically populate all the three required cells that we had specified on the VLOOKUP function. So this is a very, very useful feature. You will see in business and in practical applications, generally you don't have to just extract one column, you will have to extract multiple columns. This is a very quick and efficient way to accomplish that. All right. So let's quickly move on to another easy but useful at many times feature within this, and that feature has got to do with the fact that you would often deal with multiple data sets. Speaking of that, you could very well have a situation where on a single worksheet, so for example, we are on this worksheet called raw data, and you're looking at one table. This table extends from column A till column G, but then you could have another table which runs all the way from column L till column R, or another table which runs from column T to column Y. So you could have multiple data tables on the same worksheet. Sometimes bases the business problem that you're trying to solve or the context, what you'll also have is one single table, but the values within the table have slightly different meanings. So maybe from row number 2 all the way till row number 10 is a specific data set, even though they are on the same data table, but the meanings are slightly different. In such circumstances where you're dealing with multiple data tables, it can become cumbersome for you to just look at a formula and understand what's going on. In some of these cases, it is advisable to actually give a name to the table or give a name to the data set, and then that makes it far more easier for us to actually interpret what that formula is. Okay, so let's understand that with an example. So if you recall, when we were doing the VLOOKUP function earlier on, so what we had done was we had done the VLOOKUP function, and let's say this is the lookup value, and we are trying to look up the sale number here, and we want to, let's say, return the city. For example, the city is in column C, which is third column. Let's say we select this only till here, and the third column, and we want an exact match, so 0, and that's how we ran it, correct? Now, if you were to just look at this formula right now, and assume that the data columns are not visible to you, assume that the data is not visible to you, okay? And probably that's a difficult thing for you to imagine, so let's replicate it. Let's say we are on a completely different sheet right now, okay? And this is where you want to run a VLOOKUP, for instance. And what we want is, let's say we want the city. We want to extract the city and populate the city for each sale number on this sheet. And we apply the same VLOOKUP function, and the lookup value, select it. Now go back to that sheet from where you want to select the data. Let's select the data again, and let's say we want the third column and we want it to be 0. Okay, there we are. As you can see, we have the same result here. We We can replicate the freezing act right here. So let's freeze the cells here. Okay, so we've frozen the range. Once you've frozen the range, you can simply drag it. As you can see, you will still get the same results, even though you're working from a different worksheet, because within Excel, what happens is with a reference to the worksheet, you can apply your formulas across multiple worksheets. If you click on this cell right here, as you will see, before the range, your range is from A2 till G10, it tells you raw data. What does it mean? It means that it is picking up this range from the raw data worksheet. So when it says A2 and G10, that A2 and G10 is not on your current sheet, sheet 2. That A2 and G10 is from your worksheet titled raw data. That's how you should interpret it. Okay. So let's say we save this file and we close this file. Okay. And then you email this file to a friend of yours. Now the friend of yours opens this file and comes to the sheet and looks at this formula. Now, when they look at this formula, they see, okay, well, I understand this is a VLOOKUP function. We are looking up the data from column B, specifically B3 in this line item. And we are looking up the range A2 and G10. But wait, what is A2 and G10? Now, to answer that question, what they would have to do is they would have to first go to the raw data sheet, look at A2 and G10 and kind of understand that, okay, this is a data set, fair enough, and this is where VLOOKUP is being applied. Pretty simple, right? Now imagine that if there are 5 or 6 different worksheets with data and there are different VLOOKUPs extracting data from different sheets, then obviously they will have to open up each and every sheet, understand what that range really means of data and what are we extracting from that sheet, and so on and so forth, which makes life a bit difficult, especially if you're trying to interpret data on a worksheet that was not made by you in the first place. It was done by somebody else. Right? In some of these circumstances, instead of just having something like raw data in a range, it might sometimes be much more useful to actually create data sheets with names being given to specific data tables. An example of that is if you were to go back to raw data and let's give a name. So basically we need a name for this data set, all the way from cell number A1 going all the way till cell number G101. So we need to give a name to this. Okay, once we give a name, we can identify what this data set means, and then interpretation of that kind of becomes much more easier. Okay, so let's say, how do we do that? So in order to give a name to this data table, step 1 is let's go ahead and select this. So let's select this range. That's our step 1. So we have selected the range. Now once you've selected the range, what you have to do is you'll see on the top left there is normally a space where you generally see cell references, meaning if you were on cell number C5, it will show C5 in there. If you were on cell number A7, it will show A7 in there. So right now we've selected a data range and you see right now it's blank, so it may or may not be blank. But whatever the state is, what you have to do is you have to just type in the name of the table there. So the moment I click on it, you see A1 appears in that cell. So I'm going to remove that A1. And let me call it egg. So for agricultural equipment, I'm just going to call it agri, and let me just call it agri sales table. Okay, and that now has become the name for this table. Now, how would this be useful? So remember, we were trying to use VLOOKUP to extract data for this. So now the way VLOOKUP would be applied is if you were to apply the VLOOKUP formula here and look up the same thing, which is look up sale number. And now this time, instead of selecting the range as we had done manually, we can just type in the name of the data set or the name of the data table. So what was it? Remember, it was agri or agri sales table. See, the moment you type in the word AGRI, below that it shows you that yes, there is a named table that you have now created. So you could just select on agri sales table or agri sales table here, right? And then within the agri sales table, which column do we want to return? Let's say we want to return the column for city, which is the third column, and we want an exact match. So your Boolean value is false or your numeric value is 0. You hit enter and there you are. And then you can simply go ahead and drag the formula. Perfect. So what is the benefit of this over what we've been doing so far? So if you click on Tucson now, look at the formula. This time the formula is not just something like I2 J15 or B2 K 3071, no, which is difficult to interpret. This time when you look at the Vlookup formula, right after the lookup value, you will notice that it tells you that this data is from the agri sales table, which has much more business sense or business meaning than just giving a range selection, which will just give you the indices or the rows and columns along with the cell number in Excel. That's difficult to interpret unless you're used to the sheet, or unless you're using the sheet repeatedly. Otherwise, it can be a challenge. So many a times this feature has application when dealing with multiple data sets. All right, so this is another useful feature. Moving on from this, so far what we've done is we've kind of limited ourselves to the options for exact match in Vlookup. One thing we haven't covered so far is the other option, which is the option of true or the option of so the Boolean value of true or the numeric value of 1. What does that mean? So let's look at that for a second here. So for instance, let's say when you type in the Vlookup function and let's say your lookup value is 816, and then from here what you do is you select your range, for instance, and right after that, let's say you want the city, you go ahead and select third column, and then you generally put in 0, correct? This is what we've done so far. However, instead of that, let's say if you were to use the other option for the fourth parameter, which is the option of 1, which is a Boolean value of true, what does this stand for? As you can see on the screen, this is an option to be used for an approximate match. When you use the value for 0, that's an exact match. The value of 1 is an approximate match. So this is another handy feature which can be used many times. So now the question is, how do we use this and where do we use this option of 1? So this option of 1 can be used in a couple of different ways. The most basic ways in which you can use an approximate match in Excel is if you're doing any manipulation computation on text data and you only have a partial part of a field, then you can use an approximate match to obtain some values. So it is also often known as a partial match in normal Vlookup Excel vernacular. So let's see, how does this work? So the way this would work is, let's say we have the names of the cities and we want to get the names of the states. Okay, so this should be pretty simple, right? And it is. You just have to do a simple Vlookup with an exact match. You'll get the names of the states. However, let's say if for some reason you only had the city names partially available. So what I'm doing is I'm just sniping off some part of the city names right there. Okay, so there we are. Right, so as you can see right now, you don't have the exact city names anymore. And if you try and do a Vlookup now, this ain't gonna work. So let's take a look. If you were to apply a Vlookup now, and on the Vlookup, what we'll do is we'll do the lookup value and we want to return the state, correct? So select this as your range right there, and you can simply select the second column and do the exact match as we've been doing. See, there you are. You get an error value, right? What does this error value mean? It shows a value is not available, and which is true. You're searching for the word sacra and the word sacra does not exist within city, right? None of these is sacra. Yes, sacra can be a subset of a word, but by itself it's not an independent value, right? So you're not going to get any matches here. And again, you can expect the same behavioral functionality for, if you were to drag this forward, you will again not get any matches because none of them exist as a city in the city column, right? So the exact match doesn't work in this case. In a scenario like this, the approximate match, is not going to help you a lot. So what you should be doing rather in such cases is limit yourself to an exact match only, but use a wildcard character. Okay, so basically, if you know a bit about programming or computers, otherwise wildcard characters are placeholders. When you don't know or if you have missing information on a field, what you can do is you can substitute some of those letters or information with wildcard characters, generally with asterisks or question marks are the most common. So let's see how this is going to function here. So let's say, how does this work? So let's do a Vlookup. And on the Vlookup, what we want to do is we want to look up this value, right? We want the value of I2, correct? But you know that I2, which is sacra in this case, is not a complete value in itself. It is missing some information, right? So what you can do is, instead of looking up for I2, what we need to do is we need to look for I2 and something else along with that. So in I2, if you have sacra, what you're missing is the part of the string which is mento, right? So in order to run this search, what we need to tell is we need to tell Excel that while I know a part of the string which is sacra, that's why I'm specifying I2, there is some part of the string which I don't know. And to specify that don't know to Excel, you have to use a wildcard. So what we do is we use an ampersand or an and then we specify the wildcard as an asterisk. Okay, asterisk specifying that we don't know. So we know that there is a string which starts with SACRA, but we don't know what is after that. Okay, and then so we are searching for I2, which is sacra, and the wildcard character, right, which is basically a placeholder for anything beyond sacra. And then we specify the range. Let's say this is the range, column C and column D. Let's specify the range. We are still looking for the second column, and we are looking for an exact match. Okay, there we are. As you can see, what Excel has now done is it has taken I2, which is sacra, and after sacra, it has on its own added wildcard characters, and then it has searched. It has searched in column C for any word or any string which has that structure. The first 5 letters are sacra, followed by any number of letters or characters, any number of letters after that, letters or characters after that. That's how it found the match for sacra right here and returned us the word California. Now that we have done that, the rest of it is pretty standard, cut and dried. You just freeze the ranges accordingly and drag it, and there you are. You will get the correct matches. So this is an important feature to bear in mind. So remember that with text data, you will likely have trouble with an approximate match. But what you can do is you can use an exact match instead. Just make sure that you're using wildcard characters appropriately, sometimes as suffixes, sometimes as prefixes, sometimes as both, depending upon the nature of the data that you have. And you will be able to still recover data using a partial match utilizing wildcard characters. Okay, now so much for using or trying to use approximate match on text data. What about numeric data? Now within numeric data, again, remember that instead of using the exact match with wildcard characters, within numeric data there is a very, very specific and useful application that you can have from an approximate match. And that application is in bucketization of data. So if you have a data set and you're trying to bucketize that data set into different buckets or different classes of data, then you can do that very effectively using the approximate match. Sometimes it is also referred to in some texts as a range lookup or range VLOOKUP also. Some texts would call it. So how does that truly function? So to understand how that truly functions, let's take a quick example. So let's say that given this data set that you have right now, let's say what the company is interested in is the company wants to not only look at the sales revenue, let's say the company also wants to look at what is the sales revenue in different groups. And the groups are, let's say, are going to be, groups are going to be less than $5,000. Okay, so that's one group, less than $5,000. Then they are interested in, okay, how much sale have we done from 5,000 to, let's say, 5,000 to $10,000, and then how much from $10,000 to $15,000, and then let's say from $15,000 to $20,000, from $20,000 to $25,000, from $25,000 to, let's say, $30,000. And since I know this data set, I know that the maximum value is around 30,000. So this is going to be, let's say, greater than equal to $30,000. Okay, so let's say what is required is that we bucketize all of this data. Right now, you can bucketize all of this data by using a nested if function as well, and I'll leave a link for that one in terms of how to use a nested if. We've covered that in a previous video. Now on this one, what you can also do is, instead of using a nested if, you can use a pretty nifty trick within the approximate match within Excel. So how does that work? So the way it would work is, the way the VLOOKUP approximate match really functions for us is, when we are looking for a certain value with an approximate match, what it does is it looks up that value, and then when it looks up that value, it finds the lower end or the floor value of that, and then returns that match. I know that's a mouthful of words. It will be simpler if you were to look at an example. So let me lay out what this is. So let's say, corresponding to these buckets that you have in column J right now, what we're going to do is, corresponding to this, we will also now lay out the values that we want to look up. So remember, these are your buckets. These are your buckets. Okay. And now to return these buckets, so basically what I have to do is, I have to pick up each of these buckets and then apply them to the correct. So pick up the correct bucket and apply it to each of these rows. Okay. So let's take a look at how this would work. Okay. So in order to apply this, what we'll do here is, for each of the buckets on the left side, we will specify for which value do we need to pick up this bucket. For which value do we need to pick up this bucket? Okay, so let's specify the ranges like this. Okay, and as you can see, Excel kind of picks it up on its own, but replace it by numeric values. Another important thing for you to bear in mind is, when you're creating these ranges right here, make sure that these ranges are in ascending order, else your VLOOKUP range for numeric values will not function the way you intended it to function. So now that we have created it, let's go ahead and apply this. Let's just put buckets here and pay close attention to this one so that you don't miss it. So VLOOKUP on this one, and what are we looking up? We're looking up this value, which is the sales revenue. And where are we looking it up? We're going to look it up in this range that we have just artificially created. Okay, and once we look it up in this range, what do we want to return? We want to return the bucket, the corresponding bucket, which is column 2 in this range. And this time, instead of the exact match, which is a Boolean value of false, we want an approximate match. Why is that? Because when we look for an approximate match, what it will do is, it will obviously not find the exact match. It will find the closest value which is less than it. Okay, the closest value which is less than what you're looking up, and return the corresponding value in that column. Okay, so for instance, if you're looking for the value of 500, if your sales revenue is 500, okay, it will start by looking at column J. When it looks at column J, it will see that the closest number which is less than it is the number 0. And what is the corresponding value on the right side? The corresponding value on the right side is LT 5000. So it will return LT 5000. Let's take another example. Let's say the sales revenue was 12,500. So it will start off by looking in column J. I'll see that the closest number which is less than 12,500 in this set of cells is the value of 10,000. And what is the value that it has right next to 10,000? The bucket is 10,000 to 15,000. So it will return 10,000 to 15,000 as your match. So let's go ahead and complete this formula and see what happens. There you are. The moment it searched for 500, so it picked up 500, came here, and saw, okay, which is the closest value which is less than 500? The closest value less than 500 is 0. Right next to it is LT 5000. Remember, we specified the column index as 2. So in this range, it is looking for this second column, and the second column is LT 5000, and that's what it returned here. Okay, now to drag this formula, let's go ahead and first of all freeze it. Let's freeze the range on this one with J and K. So this is done. And now let's go ahead and just apply the formula to all of them. Now what you'll see is that, so let's scroll down. And the moment you get a value in excess of 5,000, so 5,000 or excess of 5,000, you can see it has picked up the right range of 5,000 to 10,000. If the value is in excess of 10,000, for example, if the value was 13,000, you can see it has picked up the right range of 10,000 to 15,000. So this is a very, very useful technique to generate buckets for a data set, for a numeric data set to be more precise. Just be careful of how you generate this range. Always remember that when you have data organized, numeric data organized in an ascending order, and then you use the approximate match, what Excel will try and do with the approximate match is always find the closest number lower than it on this data range, and then return the corresponding column. And that's how you will always end up with the right set of buckets. Once you have generated these buckets, you can do a lot of things with it. You can develop pivots, including the buckets column within that pivot, and then you can analyze the data for each range. So this makes it a very useful tool to generate additional information that is utilized very often in data analysis. So this is how you could use the range within Vlookup. All right. So quick recap on what we have covered. So today we started off by looking at what an exact match is. We understood that an exact match would obviously only work when you have an exact value that you're looking for. If you don't have an exact value, what you will generally get is an error value, which is going to be #NA, which means it couldn't find the value in that sheet. We also looked at an interesting application and a very practical one if you're trying to return multiple columns. For the same, we looked at naming data sets for our convenience, especially true when you're dealing with multiple data sheets or multiple data sets, and it becomes a nightmare for you to interpret just by looking at the column indices as to what does that data really represent. We looked at approximate match with text data. We saw that it's not always efficient or useful, and what is more useful is combining a wildcard character with an exact match to get information back from text data. Finally, what we looked at is approximate match with numeric data, which has a lot of application when you're using data on a range or doing a range lookup. A very practical application, that is bucketization of data. All right, so that's all that we had for this video. Hopefully this was informative and useful to you. Till next time.